Observation in any exploration is the first step. The next step is nearly always structured observation. You start to be more precise in your observations. You start to record them more carefully. I judge that this whole field of NDE is relatively young in that regard, at least compared to some other areas of exploration. My understanding is about 1 person in 40 across the world, across different societies, relates having one of these. So it's a common human phenomenon. This idea of near-death experiences, that's what makes it interesting. As soon as you see something that's that common, happens that frequently, it suggests that there could be something there and you'd really like to explore it, to understand it a little bit more deeply. It reminds me of the early explorers who were studying terra incognita, parts of the earth that had not been explored, that were not understood, at least to the people who were doing the exploring. It's that Christopher Columbus sailing across the great ocean sea to the west, thinking he'd reach India. It's Marco Polo, an even better one, Sir Richard Burton, going native in Arabic cultures and bringing back exotic reports of almost magical experiences. Did they all follow the same route? No. Did they all see the same things? Well, with their different routes, they saw different landmarks, different features that they came back and reported. But eventually, over time, you can get enough observation to build a map, to build a description of what's out there, a description that others could use to plot their course, potentially. In some real sense, that's what science does, is build that map in a replicable, defensible, predictable way. Almost all good science has to do with making predictions. You observe for some period of time, you start to generate ideas about what's happening behind that, what describes it, what the laws or rules or structure is behind it. Especially when you look at near-death experiences. People on the boundary of death, very often declared dead and then pulled back. They describe experiences. We've been able to classify them. They have a structure to them very often. They appear to happen at a point in time when it at least appears scientifically that the brain is not functioning. These areas suggest that the nature of consciousness may go beyond our current understanding. And in those circumstances, they demand further exploration. You know, if you look at those old maps of the world, they're kind of right. But eventually we get far better surveying techniques. You have to be able to position yourself on the surface of the earth. Our techniques get better. And over time you get a more precise map. And eventually today we have satellites in orbits that take pictures. Doesn't get much better than that in terms of a map. You see, science is all about building the map. So, in a very real sense, the people who are doing NDE research today, it seems to me, are those early explorers. They're relying primarily on observation to build an initial map. They've identified particular patterns, structured observation. Those patterns have withstood at least some preliminary scrutiny in terms of potential alternative sources. I saw one study where people used electroencephalograms, EEGs, to measure electrical activity in the brain. We can tell how the brain's working fairly well. What they showed was that the brain tends to shut down within 2 or 3 minutes. But many people with NDEs, near-death experiences, are describing events that happen well past that time. When in theory, at least, there is no electrical activity in the brain. Now that's interesting. What's going on? These areas of science are all nascent. The size of the universe is universal. It's massive. We have a lot yet to understand. It's one of the most fun things about science. There's always a new horizon. There's always a new distant land to be explored. There's always a new idea to test. It makes every day an adventure.